Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome.
I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, as part of continuing founder and CEO season, my guest is the co-founder of Liveblocks, Stephen Fabre. Liveblocks is a company that makes creating online collaborative multiplayer applications accessible to all developers. They do this by handling a lot of the infrastructure behind their serverless offering, while also giving pre-baked React hooks and components to developers and lower-level primitives if that's something developers want. Giving developers these options and tools helps create these things. In our discussion, we talk about Stephen's journey to building the company, having previously worked at Envision and then competing with Figma and now creating Liveblocks. We talk about the key decisions that leads to Liveblocks being a viable product for developers, as well as some of its internals and how it works. We talk about the decisions between choosing the right level of abstraction, either giving people pre-baked React components, why React, why not Solid, etc., etc. In our discussion, if you're new, or even if you're experienced as a front-end engineer or a web engineer, if you've ever felt like building Google Docs style collaboration, and if you've ever wondered how all of this works, this discussion is undoubtedly for you. I'd like to offer this to all of you at zero cost, as this is separate to my day job. And the way we can do that is through sponsors. So if you'll join me in a minute, let's thank the sponsors, and then we can continue the discussion. This podcast is sponsored by and partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters teaches in a very similar way to me. Like if you've ever wondered how Git and Docker and Redis and these kinds of things work under the hood, well, with Code Crafters, you build them from scratch in a language that you know. Of course, these are not production-grade robust things, but you build the underlying mechanism of how they work. This way, you actually increase your understanding of the tools, but also level up your programming understanding with the language you choose. It's a really great way to learn multiple things. They have a paid tier, but if you use the code in the link in the description, that's tej.as/codecrafters, you can get up to 40% off through the Contagious Code podcast. So I highly encourage making use of that. The Contagious Code podcast is also sponsored by and partnered with That Conference. That conference is happening in less than a month in Wisconsin. It's a really great multidisciplinary tech fest full of great people and great opportunities to meet great people. I have spoken at that conference twice, and it's been a great experience all around. If you'd like to attend, then share this episode on social media and say, I'd like to get a ticket to that conference, and you will enter a raffle to do so. So there's more details that we can iron out after, but that's the gist of it. You just share this on social media and you'll enter that raffle. Finally, the Contagious Code podcast is partnered with Stately.ai. Stately is a great way to visualize the flow of logic through your application using state charts. So you design these state charts in their world-class visualizer, diagramming tool. And from there, you can export the state charts straight to JSON and just fill in the business logic of how state A transitions to state B with the rest of the model already existing. It's a great way to make your applications robust and scalable. And if you'd like to give it a try, go to stately.ai. Thank you for joining the podcast. Here's my discussion with Stephen Fabre. Stephen Fabre, what an honor having you on the Contagious Code podcast. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tejas. Good to be here.
So I've been a fan of Liveblocks for a while. I've used it. And I must say, I really liked, you talked about this in a conference. I liked how it's sort of pre-baked components. It's like you export a bunch of components.
I lost you for a bit, Tejas. I don't know what happened.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's the network. This will not be in the final recording. That's totally fine. Okay. Yeah, I was talking about Liveblocks and how I've been a huge fan because part of the offering is these pre-baked React hooks, right, and components. And I think that's very novel. And I'd like to talk about all of that. But before we get into the details, could you maybe do an introduction? Yourself, Liveblocks, sort of where you've come from to now. And the reason for that is what we do here is if you think of a graph data structure, there's a lot of dots, and we just connect the dots, right? So let's start at the beginning and go from there.
Yeah, sure. I'm Steven, born in France, southwest of France. Moved around quite a bit. I spent most of my childhood in my hometown, tiny little town called Rodez. Probably 30,000 people live there. Loved computers from a very young age. Started building websites, learning how to design when I was like 12, maybe 14 years old. Then eventually studied computer science for a bit. But what I really liked was like more the design aspect and like the combination of design and code. And so I didn't quite fit in. I felt like, I was with like more like hardcore engineers, and I was more like, how can I create something visually appealing, and how can I create those interactions? That was really what I enjoyed. And then I lived in many different places, moved to Quebec in Canada for an internship for a while, and then ended up moving to Sydney in Australia for like 7.5 years. Got into the tech scene there, different startups, started a couple myself, and eventually moved to New York City, lived there for a few years before starting Liveblocks. And now I've been working on Liveblocks for about 3.5 years, I think. Yeah, something like that.
Was it New York City where you worked at Envision? Was that on-site?
Well, actually, Envision was one of the pioneers in like remote work before COVID and before remote work was really a thing. So I actually started working at Envision when I was in Sydney.
Okay.
Worked there for like 4.5 years. And I did the first 2 years remotely from Sydney, while most of the team was either on the East Coast in the US or in Europe. So that was really challenging time zone wise. But then I eventually moved to New York and did like about 2.5 years and at Envision in New York in a sort of better time zone, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I learned a lot that way on like remote work and that sort of stuff.
And Liveblocks today is a remote company, right? So I wonder if there's lots of this is a good discussion point for when we get to Liveblocks. Did you notice the internet was faster at all in New York? Because a lot of people say I'm in the cloud. I'm in US East.
I don't know if it was faster. I had a pretty good internet provider, but it felt pretty good. Definitely faster than Australia. Australia is back in my time there, like it was quite a bit behind in terms of like infrastructure for like the internet was quite a bit slower, but not too bad.
I think it's no surprise that you mentioned, hey, there were these like, as you put it, hardcore engineers, and there was me, who I didn't care so much about like the best algorithms. I cared more about design and making sure things looked polished and also worked well. And I think this is very clear when you look at liveblocks.io, liveblocks.com.io.
We have both domains, but liveblocks.io is the one that you see.
Okay,
Fancy,
yeah. So when you look at liveblocks.io, what you see is just beautiful. In fact, this is what I use. Even in my job, I tell them, I'm like, hey, go look at liveblocks.io, and that's what we should look like. It's just this masterclass in polish, because like you've got these little Easter eggs too. I think a lot of people don't know, but like these dots on the homepage is actually a game, right? You can play like Connect 2 or something with people. So that's what I associate with Liveblocks. And now you tell me, it's because I have this design background. It all starts to click. Are you familiar with, have you seen perhaps around the industry this job title, this role of design engineer? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'm a bit of a hybrid. Like I love the design side of things as much as the engineering side of things. And the combination of both is where the real magic happens, in my opinion. And when we first started the company in 2021, I think, not at the very beginning, but like maybe 4 to 6 months in, we wanted to get, we needed to hire some designers on the team to scale things up a little bit. And we decided to go with, we wanted to find designers that knew how to code, because we were a small team, and also we needed people that were that could do a lot of different things, right? Especially when you're small, like you have like 5-ish people on the team, or maybe up to 10 people, like you'll have to wear a lot of different hats. And so we wanted to get designers that knew how to code, just so that they could implement their own solutions on the marketing side, the dashboard side of things, like the actual app. But also because our product is very technical, right? We're creating APIs and, as you mentioned, hooks and components. Those are like technical like APIs. It's not like, when you build most SaaS products, you typically have like a product you go to, you have an interface. But when you build a dev tools, it's not like that. It's like your product is like the sum of all those little things, the docs, the APIs, the types that you have in your SDKs, the dashboard where you monitor your app, grab your API keys and all that stuff. So it's like,
It's a
I want a bit on a
mishmash.
tangent here, but it's like a mismatch of different things. And to us, it was very important to get people that could do a bit of both. So yeah, pretty early on, we hired a couple of designers that could do a bit of coding, but also design. And I think I think it's a spectrum, right? And that's something we try to get right when we hire people at Liveblocks. Is like when you look at the skills you need to build a product, you go like all the way to the left, or it depends where you go. All the way to the left, you have like branding, like visual stuff, and all the way to the right, you have like backend engineering, like ops, all that sort of stuff, scalability of the infrastructure. And I think like you want to find people along that spectrum that where there's a little bit of overlap, so that people can like pass the baton to each other and build a super cohesive experience end to end. So yeah, I went a bit on the tangent here, but yeah,
No, it's
love
good.
design engineers. I think it's a great way to build polished products for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like Liveblocks actually had design engineers before the title was sort of formalized, because of this, right? That's very interesting. When I was early in my career, I was like you, and what I mean by that is I've cared a lot about design more than code. And nowadays, I sort of care about both. I'd say significantly. However, like some people recognize me for like, oh, you built this thing and it's so great and it works. Indeed, even at work, like when I build software, people sometimes say, oh, that's some hardcore engineering, as you put it, right? But all of this, I'm not flexing here. All of this is just a response to something I faced earlier in my career, and I'm curious if you have a similar experience. And what I'm talking about is, back when I was moving in the direction of a design engineer, I cared a lot about polish. In fact, most of my jobs were like, here's a landing page, make it pixel perfect, because no matter how many front-end engineers we've thrown at this, things are always off. And so I was the person they came to when the website was even built based on a Figma, but it just wasn't perfect, like, and they would do this great test where they had the Figma open on one tab and the implementation open on another tab, and they would like rapidly switch between them and look at things jump around. This shouldn't happen, right? And so that came to me, and I was like this design fixer with code, and we'd have like the SaaS and everything. And
Yeah.
I enjoyed that, but at the same time, my teammates were pretty mean, and this is a long time ago. This is very, very long ago, before we were like friendly with each other, and there was a lot of like, oh, okay, it's time for you to move some pixels, you pixel pusher. You're not a real engineer. You just like make pretty pictures. This was around the time Node.js came out, and I thought, this is cool, a server-side runtime. I want to write some stuff here. Also GraphQL, right? I said, hey, I'd like to write some GraphQL and so on. And the response from my team, including my manager, was, no, you just stick to your pretty pictures, okay? And so I'm curious, have you experienced this type of thing as well, where, there's sort of gatekeeping, but also the design side is not associated with as much skill, perhaps, as the engineering side?
That's very interesting what you mentioned. I guess I fell into design in a kind of a happy accident, because I always loved design. I like the mix of both, like design and code, but I honestly had no idea you could have a career in design. No idea. And in fact, my first job was as a web developer, because I was like, oh, I have to study computer science. I have to do like the hardcore engineering, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to get a career here.
I like that.
But
That's just the
thankfully-
term we use now. Hardcore engineer. Yeah.
Just making fun here, but yeah. And I remember when I joined, I worked at a startup in Australia, and I was the web developer on a design team. And to me, this is what got me into design. So I felt like there was a bit of a wall there for sure. But thankfully, that team kind of enabled me to move into design. And then when I was more into the design side, I felt like people were pretty welcoming, but there were times where, because I knew how to do both, where maybe I overstepped a little bit into kind of the engineering side, or that's how it was perceived at some, like, sometimes. But overall, I feel like people have been. I haven't had that experience as much. Like I felt people have been pretty welcoming overall. But yeah, it's a very different skill set. I feel like because like engineers is very like matter of fact most of the time. Like there's less room for. Actually, that's not true. There's room for opinion, but I feel like in design it's a bit more subjective.
Definitely.
And so it's quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I had my first job at a design agency, and I remember getting into this huge argument with the head of design where she said, this text needs to be vertically centered in this container. And for me, I just threw code at it. I said, okay, cool. So like top 50 transform Y minus 50%. Mathematically, by code, it's centered. And she said, no, it's not centered. And I said, what do you mean? It's like, look, it's like I wrote the CSS to put this in the center. Now, of course, what I wasn't accounting for was line height or leading, the intrinsic font leading of the glyphs, right?
Yeah, the baseline or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And she kept saying it's not centered. And I said, but the code says it's centered. She said, yes, but we're not machines. We have eyes. And this was a huge fight. So anyway, all that to say, yes, there's definitely lots of skill required there. Okay, so you bring this background to Liveblocks. You worked at InVision before, that innovated a lot, and also was ahead of its time with remote work. I've used InVision. In fact, at this design agency where I started working, we were using InVision. We were using InVision to create these high-fidelity mock-ups, sort of like Figma does now, with hot zones, right? And you click on them and you get like a little prototype. What was your role there? What did you build?
Yeah, so I joined InVision because I was working on a animation tool called Easy. And it was basically a tool that enabled designers to create animations without having to code, right? They would get their sketch layers or Photoshop layers before Figma was even a thing, and you could animate those. That's how I joined InVision, right? Because they wanted to create a new application end-to-end to create prototypes, websites, UI design, kind of an all-in-one tool to create all kinds of like creative, visual, interactive experiences. That's why I joined the team, and that was in 2016. And I was a product designer. I was working on this new tool called InVision Studio. And yeah, at first I think the team originally was like 4 or 5 people. When I joined, we were like 5, maybe 6, 7. And by the time I left, we were like 60 to 70 people on that team alone. So it grew quite a bit. I mostly worked on like the animation part because that was kind of my background on that with that tool that I built in the past, and the prototyping side of things. And towards the end, basically the last 2 years when I worked at InVision, Figma was starting to get a lot of market shares, essentially. More and more designers were starting to use it. And it was a really great tool. Like the design tools were very precise. It was very performant. And most and foremost, it was browser-based and collaborative, multiplayer. And that had a lot of benefits because, to go back to the point that we discussed earlier, like having that experience being browser-based enabled not only designers to work in design files, but also brought in the engineers, the product people, the stakeholders. They could all collaborate in one space. Like you basically copy a URL, paste it, and you're all together in the same space collaborating. So that was resolving a lot of like hiccups in like the collaboration process. And so we had this project at InVision to convert InVision Studio, which was a desktop-based, file-based application. So when you wanted to collaborate, you actually had to upload your file to like InVision Cloud, and that's where you would leave the comments and all that stuff. So it was quite broken. And we wanted to do something a little bit more like Figma. And long story short, I was heading up design for that project, and we set up leadership set up like a dedicated squad to work on this of like 7 to 8 people. And it took a year and a half to build the initial version, to make it browser-based, multiplayer like Figma with like live cursors and all that stuff, having like comments, notifications, and all that. And that's basically where I first started to get really exposed to the problem I'm solving now at Liveblocks with my co-founder and the rest of the team. And I didn't know at the time that I would start a company around this problem space, but I definitely felt the problem because I was like, every app has to work that way. It has to be collaborative. It has to be browser based. It has to be fast. But it just was a nightmare to put it together. A nightmare.
Yeah.
So it took way too long. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's so cool. Two things. One, what we do on the podcast a lot is we start with a bunch of floating dots and we connect them, and it's so cool because we connected your beginnings and to Envision and now to Liveblocks. That path has become really clear. Also, I think there's a big takeaway here for listeners, and you can maybe share your thoughts on this. Where if people are thinking about being entrepreneurial and starting something, I know a lot of folks who are like, yeah, I want to start a company. I don't know what yet, but I want to do it. Mainly because they feel that like they don't want to work on someone else's project, but they want to own something. Would you agree that the best way to go about it is to just keep working for someone else, keep doing your thing until you find a pain point and you go like, oh, this is really painful. I want to solve it en masse.
Yeah, I think so. I think like whether you do it like the VC route or like as an indie dev, like the first companies that I did were like kind of as an indie developer, like kind of creating my own apps before going the VC route. I think it's really good to start a company or business around a problem that you face yourself, because what that means is that you have a unique insight perhaps into that problem. You're the user you're solving the problem for, right? Which helps a ton. And also often, not always, but often it means that you may have had an insight into a problem space before most people have had it.
Yeah.
And timing is quite important when you start a business, I think. Like in the context of like Liveblocks, for instance, I feel like we faced this problem of like creating something collaborative because Figma was like starting to get a lot of market shares, and we were sort of lucky to face that problem, I guess. In retrospect, at the time it sucked, but now in retrospect, I think it's a good thing. It happened in a way, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like going after a problem that you're passionate about, something that you think about a lot, that's challenging enough, that you feel like enough other people will have, I think it's definitely a good way to start. It's not the only way. I'm sure there's a ton of businesses that get started because, you know, people think about like business plans. This is definitely not the way I've done it. Yeah. But,
yeah. You mentioned something really interesting. You said you could go the VC route or you could be an indie dev. And you mentioned you did do the indie dev thing first, and then you decided for VC for Liveblocks. Can we talk about some of the trade-offs there? Why? Why would you go with either one, and when?
I mean, there's a lot of different opinions on this topic. I feel like for me, I can give my own opinion, but I think it really depends on the business you're building. Like for something like Liveblocks, I generally feel like it's not really possible to do it the indie route because it's quite a complicated product. Like infrastructure work, there's a lot of engineering work to be done. It just takes time and money to put that together. And like if you go the indie dev route, realistically, you're going to be by yourself for like multiple years. And like what you can do as a team of 1 or 2 is quite different than what you can do as a team of 5 or 10. Although I don't think adding more people necessarily makes you go faster, but I think past a certain, like below a certain threshold, it does make you go faster for sure. Yeah. So I think those are the 2 main points I would say. Like, what do you need realistically in terms of resources to build a compelling enough product solution to have a chance to succeed?
Yeah.
In many cases, you can be by yourself and you can be successful. And in that case, it probably makes no sense to raise VC money. But in some cases, you probably need to. And I think for something like Liveblocks, that was a must-have for sure.
You know, every time VCs come up in this podcast, it reminds me of an episode we did with Glauber Costa, the CEO of Terzo Database. He's the most Joe Rogan CEO I've ever seen in my life. Like we were talking about, exactly what you think it means. We were talking about fundraising, and it's the same question, VC or indie or so on, and he said he calls his VCs lizard people. and he's and he's just like, yeah, man, sometimes you just need to raise money. He's very casual.
Yeah.
And I love it. And I say, are you sure you want me to publish this episode? When you call VCs lizard people, and he's like, yes. In fact, he's like, the good VCs just know that that's kind of a joke, and they can take a joke. And he's like, I would only fundraise from like people who can take a joke. And it was such a insightful discussion for those reasons. In any case, great. I think that's a very clear problem and solution, right? Like you get VC money to accelerate your idea if it's complicated. I think also, for example, if anyone's building in the AI space today, you need really expensive GPUs for most
Right.
workloads.
That's another example. Yeah, for sure. It's gonna be super
Yeah.
expensive to run that compute. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about two things about Liveblocks here, because you mentioned you started the company in 2021, which is the height of the global pandemic and lockdowns. I think Superbase also started in 2020 or 2021. And we will have Paul on the show at some point. What was that like? Was that more challenging or was it less challenging? Because I don't know genuinely. It seems like it would be more challenging because everything's stuck, right? But it would be less challenging because everything's stuck, because everyone's at home and we all have nothing better to do. So could you maybe speak to the considerations around starting a company at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I started thinking about this problem space at Envision because we faced that challenge ourselves. And that problem became even more obvious that it would be a problem that pretty much every SaaS company will have because of COVID, I would say. At that time, we're like all working from home, not all, but like most people were. And the need for browser-based collaborative tools that make you feel like you're in the same space together felt obvious to me. Or more obvious than it did before, I would say. Now, before starting the company, like I was kind of a happy accident as well. Like I just wanted to, I really enjoyed working with my co-founder, Guillaume, who was an engineer at Envision. He was based in Montreal. I lived in New York at the time. And we started experimenting on like different ideas. And we actually started Liveblocks because we were working on the video/presentation tool. Basically similar, the idea was to create something very similar to Pitch. Because I love creative tools. That's kind of what I've been doing for the past decade before starting Liveblocks. And as we worked on that video/presentation tool, we realized like 6 months in that we were spending all of our time trying to figure out the real-time aspect of things, the collaboration side of things, not the actual tooling itself. And that's when it clicked, well, okay, let's build our own. Let's take what we've built for this tool and try to productify it so that every developer, every company could use it. And so starting the company, to get back to your point, like remotely, wasn't too difficult. Like I think there's a ton of different tools that you can use today, like Stripe, and there's many others that make it quite easy to start a company. The main challenge for me was that I had my work visa in the US, and starting a company meant I had to leave the country. So that was the main challenge for me. Like personally, like I had to make a big decision, be like, okay, let's start this, and in 30 days I need to be out.
Can you not transfer a visa to a business founder visa or something?
There's probably ways. There are ways, I would say, but like that would have probably costed quite a bit of money. At the time, I had no idea like if we would be able to, like that was just my own money, right? I had to be able to kind of live for a few months. I wasn't sure if we're gonna raise capital or anything like that, and so spending tens of thousands of dollars on like lawyers was not an option, I guess, at the time for me. And
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't that complicated. I think for me, like when you start a company, it's always a lot of unknowns. And I think it's a matter of like, how do you deal with the stress or the anxiety that might create? Because that never goes away. Like everything is always new. You're always doing something you haven't done before. And so when you start the company, it's like, oh, how do I incorporate? How do I do all that stuff? And you figure it out. You make a ton of mistakes, and then you come back and you fix them and kind of move on. So
What's the best way to deal with that stress and anxiety that you mentioned? And I'm asking on behalf of many, many, many technical founders and CEOs that I'm friends with. One of them, I won't name who, said that they literally don't sleep at night in a tough economy because they're like, oh, I may not be able to continue to sustain someone's life or many people's life, and then they have to lay them off. And I mean, the anxiety and stress must be so real. And I have had the misfortune, I would say, of seeing people crack under that stress and anxiety. So you mentioned it. You mentioned you've had to deal with it. What are some protocols that help you that maybe we can export for others?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I'm the best example.
He's actually, for those not watching the video, he's like crying and melting right now. I'm joking.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hope it gets better, but yeah. No, I mean, it's tough. I definitely have friends, entrepreneurs that had gone through like depression and stuff like that. I don't think, I feel pretty lucky because I think it also comes down from like, some people are more stressed than others, and I think luckily I don't get stressed too much, I would say. But it's still stressful. Like it's the most stressful thing I've done compared to anything else in the past. For sure, like you have a team, you're accountable. If something doesn't work, like it's kind of up to you. Like there's a lot of pressure, I guess, in that sense. In terms of how I deal with it, I try to have a pretty, like, sleep for me is very important. I actually go to bed fairly early, and I try to go to bed around the same time during the week so that I have a good night's sleep. I was a pretty bad example, to be honest, like for the first 2.5 years of the company. Like when I moved back to Paris, actually, when I moved to Paris, I never lived in Paris before, but when I moved back to France, I used to do a lot of sports before, and I didn't do anything for 2 years, and I felt like I wasn't in a good shape. Like I felt like I was good, but like I was a bit more tired throughout the day and not as efficient in my work. Like what I do now for the last 2-3 months, like 3 months now, I exercise quite a bit. Sports has been super helpful, but there are times where, yeah, it still can be stressful. And for me, like that's either when the finance side of things is stressful, like when you raise capital, you have investors that want to see results, or you have that pressure, like it's not infinite, right? The amount of money you have, and so that's definitely a stress, like making sure the business is gonna survive, making sure we get all those new customers in so that we can continue to pay the bills. That's definitely stressful. And then the other part that can be stressful for me is like when we have launches, right? When we have like big marketing
in one day,
like tomorrow, for instance. So like I didn't sleep too well last night, but I'm good. I'm good overall. Yeah. So I don't have any like magic tips. I think it's a matter of like having balance in your life and trying to like have good sleep. For me is definitely the key, for sure.
You would be surprised, man. Something as simple as sleep and movement just is lost on the vast majority of people that I talk to anyway, because we somehow are great at inventing things that are more important. I'll sleep. I just need to finish this thing. And unfortunately,
yes,
if you don't sleep, you're just not regulated. So I appreciate you calling that out. Okay, I want to talk about Liveblocks in detail. We've done a great job so far of walking the path to Liveblocks, and we've almost arrived at Liveblocks. But one set of questions, one discussion I want to have just before Liveblocks is your unique insights into remote work. And you mentioned this because you worked in Australia and Europe and the United States. I think, and also you started your company in the middle of the pandemic. I think there's things to unlock there and export for the listeners around getting the most out of remote work that you may uniquely have to share with that. So maybe your I don't know, like biggest ideas that came to you working at Envision, working from Australia, etc. Things that help cement like really great culture. And the reason I bring this up is because I've had some pretty bad experiences early in remote work. I think it's no secret. I think it's even safe to say that like I joined Spotify at a time where they didn't know how to do remote work. They were in offices, and you see things in the media about how great the offices are, but when I joined, they were trying to figure it out. It didn't work. And I've seen remote work go wrong to the point where people will sometimes assume bad intentions, or people will send a bunch of messages and then there's no response, and they feel like not everyone is carrying their weight. I've seen scenarios where people will put in a lot of effort and create videos and looms and things, and then there's again no response, and so the dots don't connect sometimes. And so I'm curious what you've learned around really highly effective remote work that you can share with listeners, especially now, because from what I see from the outside, Liveblocks seems to be a highly effective remote team. So with all of that, I'd love to get your take on this.
Yeah, thank you. Trying to be effective. Yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot working at Envision, for sure. Spent 4.5 years there. First 2 years working remotely from Sydney. While everybody else was not in Australia or in Asia. It was in a very different time zone that was quite challenging, because I remember at the beginning when I started, I had to pick my hours, right? I was like, okay, how am I gonna make this work? And I decided to work at night. So like from 4 p.m. until, I forgot, like 2 a.m. or something like that. Just so I could have overlap with people.
We just talked about the importance of sleep and the regular sleep schedule.
I know, terrible, right? That was back in like 2016. I did that for a month and I was like, this is not working for me. Like, because that was the weirdest thing, because when you stopped working, I had to force myself to go to sleep, but like your brain is like going in circles because you just stopped working. And so then you would wake up in the morning and you have the entire day to chill before you actually start work. So that didn't work for me at all. Then I tried to make it work like by starting like 6 a.m. That worked a little bit better, and like finish early, and then I had the afternoon, so that worked a little bit better. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because from that experience, I'm trying to apply the good and the bad and try to create something that makes sense for Liveblocks. And so I think to make remote work, and I would say that overall it works fairly well at Liveblocks. There's obviously pros and cons, but we have, I think there are two things that are very important. One, it needs to be truly remote first. If you build a remote company, either it's all in remote or not, in my opinion. Like, I think the hybrid of like, here's an office you go to, maybe you don't, you do work 2 days from home, maybe you work 3 days at the office. I think creating a space where there's like a headquarter, it's going to make some people miss out, or they're going to feel like they're missing out. And that feeling, I think, creates tension and inefficiency in the organization. So I think when everybody's missing out from a headquarter, nobody's missing out, I guess, what I'm saying. So I think that's very important. Another thing that I think is quite important, especially at our stage, I think eventually you can make it work, is to have time zone overlap. So what we do at Liveblocks, for now at least, we only hire people between Western Europe to West Coast in the US or Canada.
Yeah.
And doing it that way means like I have 4 hours of overlap myself living in Paris, with a lot of people in the team live in Montreal or New York. And then we have like at least two with 2 hours with people on the West Coast in the US or Canada. And so I think like limiting it to specific time zones and not having any headquarter, I think is key. Another thing that's quite important, I think, as well, is like if you're going to be remote, you need to be super intentional about culture and how you do work. And that was very important to me and my co-founder early on. When we were like, I think 8 people or 7, in the very early days of Liveblocks, we decided to hire a head of people to help us kind of handle like onboarding, making sure like when we have new employees, they have a great experience, making sure the culture is super tight throughout the year. putting processes in place. I know processes sounds bad sometimes, but like putting the right things in place, like recognition, for instance, I think is very important in the remote space. Like for instance, we have like a connection corner channel in Slack where like when people do something good, we give them tacos. That's kind of the thing we have. Like we just try to recognize people at all hands in that channel. And then lastly, another thing that's very important is like remote work doesn't mean you're not going to spend time with your colleagues.
Yeah.
So that's why we do once a year, we bring everybody in a really cool location together. We try to do like team bonding exercises, like have fun together for like a week where we see each other face to face. And I think once you've seen somebody in person, there's something that happens and you truly get the person. I don't know how to explain it, but like I feel like you, Tejas, I met you in person, right? And I feel like because I know how you are, like I can understand what when you're gonna write to me in text or Slack. Like I'm gonna get the tone, I'm gonna get your vibe. If you haven't met the person before, like in person in the same space, you don't know, like, are they being sarcastic here? Like, are they rude? It's hard to get the person, you know what I mean? So I think like meeting people for real is definitely helpful. So we have this like once a year, bring all people together, and then within teams, like on specific projects, if there's a deadline or something to be done, like sometimes within the teams, they also go and meet up and spend time together in person when we can.
That's so great. Yeah, there's so much of what you said resonates because I think it's worth knowing and worth remarking here that when this is a non-negotiable piece of our biology, right? Like when we hear a sound that we're not familiar with, when we receive a message from someone we don't know, when any of this happens, the fear response is low-key triggered or maybe high-key triggered, depending on the situation. But we always have a fear response to these things. And if it's someone on Slack that we don't know, even if we say we're not afraid, we still have a fear response biochemically inside our body. And that fear response then triggers all kinds of like protection mechanisms in our brain and body that we go, I don't know about this person, I don't know about the tone, I'm a little bit suspicious. This just happens. This is like biology. And I agree. I think when you meet someone, sort of like dogs, when they meet, they sniff each other's butts and they get to know each other. Like, I think we don't do that as humans, hopefully.
You don't do
Maybe
that?
we do. I don't know. Yeah, but this like in person, I need to like smell you and understand you. I think really does mean something, and I appreciate you calling that out. Awesome. There's so much there. Thank you for going down that tangent on remote work and sharing those really really valuable insights. Let's talk about Liveblocks. So much to dive in here. Y'all are running an event soon. Unveil. I've been watching this closely. I can't wait. But let's draw a line. Again, this is what we do, right? Let's draw a line from Liveblocks, but not historically this time, but in terms of a product, all the way to Unveil. And maybe if you want to include spoilers, I won't stop you. But let's start by just broad context. What is Liveblocks? We've heard that it came from the pain. I teased at the beginning that you get like React components pre-baked for multiplayer interactions, live cursors, and so on. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. I'm not calling you a horse, but I want to hear it. That's an expression. I want to hear it from you. Let's talk about what is Liveblocks. What is the value developers get using it today, and then maybe we can talk about where it's going with Unveil.
Yeah. So Liveblocks is essentially a platform to ship features like comments, notifications, and collaborative editing into your app. And we do that by giving you either low-level APIs that you can use or pre-built React components that have their own kind of UI pre-baked and that sort of stuff. So it depends on how you want to integrate, but our goal is to make it very easy to make any SaaS product collaborative, just like Figma, Google Docs, Linear, and all those very powerful tools that most people use in collaborative tools. We're essentially to bring collaboration to the digital world and making that more accessible to companies, essentially. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit. Okay, so if I have a an app, I want to make it collaborative multiplayer. It's not using React. It's maybe using Solid. You mentioned low-level APIs. Do I understand correctly? I just like import something from Liveblocks, and I can make any framework application interactive and multiplayer.
Yeah, pretty much. We have a JavaScript client package that you install in your app, and so you can connect to the Liveblocks infrastructure behind the scenes, and we give you different primitives that you can use within your app to create those collaborative solutions. So if you want to do pretty basic, but like live selection, live cursors, all you have to do is basically pass in the kind of XY coordinates for a live cursor, and we'll basically handle kind of the real-timeness, making sure it's fast. We handle all that stuff. And you can do that for Solids or whatever front-end framework you want. And for that, you probably have to use kind of like the JavaScript package and SDK.
Yeah.
But if you use something like Next or React, we have like dedicated hooks and components for that, so that if you don't want to do all that stuff, we can save you a ton of work as well on the UI side.
Use multiplayer. Was the choice to go with React just because React is the most popular?
Yeah, mostly I feel like we wanted to, like ourselves, we use Next and React, and we felt like a lot of our customers and the people we're talking to were using Next and React, so it felt like it made sense for us to go in that direction first. It doesn't mean we're not going to support more frameworks in the future. But because we're a small team, we have to be super focused and decide to invest in one specific framework for those at least high level integrations with like components and all that. But you can still, if you use something else, you can still kind of use the lower level APIs and just use the JavaScript client.
Talking to you about this, where you mention you just need to pass in the cursor XY and Liveblocks will take care of all the rest for you. I feel somewhat inspired to build like a like a collaborative application where the other collaborator, so the other cursor is AI, and it just like finds the right places to go and literally assists you across the web. Maybe it could be a Chrome extension. Whoa, that you just have a pair cursor with you that does stuff. Like for example, hey, where's the call to action on this page, and it will just like guide you. Wow. Anyway, sidebar, but I appreciate that. I noticed a trend with ShadCN, for example. ShadCN being this like UI library where it's somewhat novel because it's not like npm install component. It's more it's more npx generate component. How does that affect? Does it maybe even at all affect Liveblocks and the decision to export pre-baked components?
Yeah, I love that library, by the way. Definitely take a lot of inspiration from that for what we built at Liveblocks. I think something that inspired us maybe a little bit more than this, I would say, is I think Clerk. For me was one of the DevTools companies that did that fairly well. And that was a little bit counterintuitive at first because I felt like being a designer myself and knowing how to design and code, I like having a lot of control over how things behave, how things work, how things look. And so that's why we started with like lower level APIs. But I think a big learning for Liveblocks, and I think this is something that we've seen work with Clerk, is that most people actually don't care that much. I think what they want is like, I want a commenting system in my app. I want auth in the case of Clerk, or I want a notification system. I want a collaborative text editor, whatever the case might be. I just want it to work. And a big chunk of that engineering work, of course, the infrastructure is hard and like scaling the WebSockets and all that stuff is very difficult. But a lot of engineering work goes into the UI. And so I think shipping UI and React components as a service is a great way to build a solution that's appealing for companies, that's very easy to adopt. And there are many ways you can still make it easily customizable and basically still have different levels of abstractions within that, right? Because you could have, I think Clerk started with this actually. They started with like super opinionated, UI components and you couldn't really modify much.
Yeah.
And now they recently shipped, I forgot what it's called, I think primitives or something like that. They have like low level of abstractions where like you can actually kind of like radix UI. You can like sort of like compose the components themselves yourself, like put in your own CSS, your own Tailwind or whatever framework you use for CSS, and make it look and feel exactly like your app. So again, within that, you have different levels of abstractions as well.
Yeah.
I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, definitely encourage like companies to ship like instead of just REST APIs. Like I think shipping like components to me is the new gold standard for shipping APIs.
Right, but is it components or is it copy paste source code of components, sort of like Shadcn? And this is the question: like, which one is? I mean, everybody's shipping components. I think Stripe maybe pioneered this with the credit card form and payment intents.
Right, absolutely.
I wonder if there's a world where Stripe instead says, no, the preferred way is to do copy paste. Has that experiment been run at Liveblocks?
Not quite yet, but I see a lot of conversations, and I think I forgot where it was from Vercel. A good rule of thumbs was like, okay, if it's like React component code, maybe just make it accessible and you copy paste it and make it your own. I think that can be true for if you add a lot of like CSS to it. We'll still need to experiment with this, to be honest. Right now, for most of our UI components in React, we have two levels of abstractions. We have the opinionated option, which comes with like CSS and CSS variables that you can use to tweak. You can already customize things quite a bit, and you still need to npm install to put that in. And then below that, we have primitives. And primitives work very similarly to what you have in something like Radix. Right. And you still need to npm install this, but you have full control on how you sort of compose this. So it's not like a full copy paste, but yeah, we still need to experiment with that. I'm curious today, like what's your opinion on that, Tejas?
I don't have one, and I try to not share them on the podcast as much as I can. But I think it's interesting. Fine, you don't have to press me too much for it. But I once built a design system where a big problem we had was maintaining version parity for the design system across the organization. So we had like many products and one central design system where it had all of the atoms, all of the building blocks, etc. So it gave you sort of pre-baked components. Here's a button, here's a select component, here's this and that. The problem we had was versioning, where product A was using version 0.23, product B was using another version, and things looked slightly different because each version would have patch changes, of course. If you change a padding in a button, and this is another whole discussion on semantic versioning, is this a minor upgrade or is this a patch version? Well, we fixed the spacing to align to our corporate grid, therefore it's probably a patch. And then this patch, when you npm install with a caret, it just automatically updates the patch version. And so things didn't look the way we wanted because versions were not the same. And this was again with pre-baked components. So the question I've been asking myself is, would copy paste like Shadcn style components fix that? And I don't think so, right? Because it's copied and pasted with the class names. If we use Tailwind with the class names already in there, so I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
I think it's quite different for chat. Yeah, it's like they give you HTML and Tailwind, right? If I'm not mistaken. So like, it's not like you need to install. I think in that case, it makes total sense to do like copy paste. For something like Liveblocks, there's a lot more like behaviors baked in. It's not just UI. It's like the logic and like pagination and like
subscription, probably
subscriptions, like making sure like there's caching involved. There's a ton of different things. So like, yeah, quite an interesting challenge. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I think that's a really great overview of what Liveblocks can do. And what I'm hearing is it's just, if anybody wants to add real-time collaboration to their application without going through the pain of rolling it themselves, use Liveblocks. And if you have React and Next.js, you get first-class support. If you don't, you can build first-class support, I assume open source-wise. I have to imagine that the main product is not the hooks and is not the code stuff. It's more the back end, because this is the, like, ensuring the service is up all the time, ensuring that conflicts in real-time data are avoided, ensuring that messages are not dropped. All of this is the actual product, right? Is that true?
I think the real key of Liveblocks and is we try to make all of those things work seamlessly well together. And I think that's the real challenge. There's obviously the infrastructure and the infrastructure side of things that you're describing right now, like making sure multiple people can store the same data simultaneously and like get the conflicts automatically resolved. We handle all that stuff. We make sure it scales. We make sure it's real time. We make sure it's fast. That's definitely challenging for sure. But I think what's also difficult is the UI part. Like there's a lot of like UI involved in like building awesome, like world-class collaborative features like Figma, Google Docs, and all those tools. And a lot of the complexity comes from the front end. And I think like making sure all those things work really well together, you know, from like when you go into a text editor, for instance, and like live selection, like making sure like you select text and you see like what other person has, what characters they have selected, or like when you add an annotation in line, making sure that the actual composer is positioned right below the live selection that you have. Even when you're on a small screen or like it doesn't fit, so you need to reposition things around, or like, I don't know if you use linear, Tejas, but like also like in linear, for instance, like when you leave a comment on documents, I don't know if you've seen on the right-hand side, they have this like annotations tray sort of. You also have that in Google Docs. When you select, like you need to scroll the thing, like you put in the right spot. Emoji reactions, like this ton of like UI that's like, it adds up. It's like months of work. So I would say that I would make the argument that obviously all of the front end side is open source, so you can like all see that on our GitHub. But what makes Liveblocks special, I think, is making all those things work end to end, from like all the way from the front end to the infrastructure, and also making sure the use cases also work really well together. You know, comments, notification, text. So I would say the entirety makes the product, in my opinion, not just the infrastructure.
And this is a real differentiator from something like PartyKit, for example, which is really just code. It's a code library that makes it very easy to deploy multiplayer applications, but you don't get like the end to end, as you put it. You don't get the UI pieces. You don't get the design engineering of it. You don't, right? Is that accurate?
I think that's fairly accurate. I think the good way to put it. I would say that PartyKit is more like the infrastructure real-time WebSocket piece, and we try to have this work well with everything else that I just mentioned. Yeah.
One could even build a competitor to Liveblocks using PartyKit. I'm not saying people should, but it's possible.
You could perhaps, yeah.
I have an idea for an example app with Liveblocks that I think would be so cool, and it probably exists already, but if not, I could even make this. It's open source, which is VS Code, so an editor, but with GitHub Copilot. But instead of Copilot, Liveblocks powers everything. You know what I'm saying? So like you have this live cursor with suggestions in the editor. I think that would be a really great use case for Liveblocks, and you could time it. How long did this take to build? Using OpenAI and Liveblocks. Anyway, that
would be great. That would be a great app to build, and like I think a good the way we think about Liveblocks is like we initially built it for human to human collaboration. And what we've learned is that we actually have a good amount of customers building AI products, and they need something like Liveblocks because AI is basically just another entity you need to collaborate with. Like in most cases, you're collaborating with a bot, an agent, whatever you call it, and it's like, hey Copilot, can you help me write this piece of code? Or like, or even if you want to ask feedback around like, I don't know, copywriting or something, like, hey, can you make me sound a little bit more happy here? And like AI could suggest some options in a comment or something like that.
We see this a lot with, for example, Google Docs. If we're talking like collaborative multiplayer apps, as you mentioned, Google Docs is one of the world-class ones. They have this auto-completion feature that can work for correct English, I guess, but it doesn't it's not personal. It doesn't know my writing style. We talked earlier about remote work, like when you meet someone in person, you sort of understand their vibe. So like if I send you a joke about like your mom or something, like you just like, okay, yeah, it's just him. He talks trash. I think with Apple's announcement recently about Apple Intelligence, their whole angle is like it's AI, but it's not just AI. It's like personal.
It
It's
knows
like to you. Yeah, I think that would be a really fun experiment to try to build with Liveblocks, like a personal note taker. I'm just like revealing ideas here because I want people to build things with Liveblocks and really understand the
it.
pleasure of using it. Yeah, as I have. Yeah, and if you're listening, build them in the open, and I'll pledge, I'll show up and help you build it on GitHub if it's open source. I think this is very cool. Okay, let's talk about the upcoming event. The event that at this time of recording is tomorrow. We ship the episodes on Monday, so there's no way we can ship it before the event. But let's talk about this. Liveblocks.io/unveil. And you know the front page. You probably built this. Join us to celebrate the future of collaboration. What is the future of collaboration?
So if it's gonna come out on Monday, I guess I can just say what this is about. So yeah, I mean it's basically we're trying to create like a moment where we can talk about all the things we've been working on. So this is mostly a marketing event to talk about the products we have. And so I think I mentioned this quite a bit previously in the conversation, but we're going more and more in the direction of like shipping high-level components and like investing a lot more into the UI side of things, because turns out there's a lot of engineering work that we can help companies not do, essentially, and take care of that work for them. And so yeah, we're announcing a brand new product, text editor. So we're shipping basically dedicated packages with the most popular text editor frameworks out there to make it very easy to add all the table stakes collaborative features into your text experience in your app. And with that, I mean, like, you import the package, and basically with several lines of code, you can add like comments that is automatically linked to the notification system, optimized for collaboration. You also have like, if you want to integrate this with like AI suggestions, which you just mentioned earlier, that will make that very easy. All the UI logic of like what I mentioned, like, when you leave an annotation, making sure things are positioned in the right spot, making sure that when you select a notation, things scroll into the right position. We take care of all that complexity for you. So that's one of the products we're announcing. And then all other products like comments is out of beta and notifications as well. And yeah, that's basically kind of what the event is about, announcing some of those products that we have now.
This text editor, is it a WYSIWYG editor? Does it support Markdown for formatting? What's the style?
So it's actually, we are not providing the text editor itself. We're providing the integration to make any text editor collaborative.
Wow.
So it's the layer that goes on top of like lexical, TipTap, and we're going to have a bunch of others that we're going to eventually work on. But for now, those are the two text editor framework that we'll support. That's
so cool. So I could get TipTap and just wrap it in a function call, it sounds like, and it's multiplayer.
Pretty much. A little bit. There's probably a little bit more things to do, but like overall, you can get it up and running and very quickly. Yeah.
Incredible. I look forward to playing with this. Okay, so it's comments is out of beta, and it's notifications. This is why I actually love Live. I think I told you this in person one time, but when I hear things like notifications is out of beta, I immediately am reminded of like trauma I had earlier in my career where I tried to build a notification system. And not just me, I think like if we go back to like 2008, 2009, Facebook.com had a notification system that relied on long polling, right? So you open a HTTP request and you just like sleep the server side until there's something to send. You send it, connection closes, open another one. Man, there's so much pain there. To hear that there's a company that just takes this away and gives me primitives, hooks that I can use, incredible. I think this is a real problem worth solving. And my hope is that through this, we get like, not just we as developers, but like users, like my mother gets like better experiences, more real-time experiences on the web.
That's the idea, right? What we're doing if I were to summarize what we do, like every week at Liveblocks, we look at the best collaborative products out there: Figma, Google Docs, Linear, Notion. We try to identify the similar patterns that they have within their product, and we try to reverse engineer some of that stuff. And notifications, for instance, there are like some notifications infrastructure provider you can use, but for us, the real challenge is of course the infrastructure is hard, but we're actually trying to give an opinionated solution on how notifications should work in the context of collaboration, so that when somebody mentions you in a comment, when somebody mentions you in a text document, that you get that notification at the right time, by email or in app notification, and making sure we don't spam you and we make it like very useful for you with the right context. Like there's nothing worse, I think, than getting like an email for everything like you've been picked on. Like that gives you a lot of anxiety. So we're trying to like take all those patterns and like think about how we could build this in a way that I think makes sense, so that companies can focus on their own product and not focus on all that really really tedious work, essentially.
Yeah. I think that's very cool. In fact, I wish there was I wish there was better notifications on like github.com. Oh, that would be so cool. Because I constantly get anxiety and I'm lost by GitHub notifications. I'll just say that here on the record. Okay.
I have all my notifications canceled. I just don't look at my notifications at all everywhere. No notifications on my phone. Yeah, I have no notifications on my phone. No notifications on Slack. I want to be deciding when I look on my phone, I only have like when people call me, then I get notification, obviously, like somebody's calling me, but otherwise no notifications.
Are you the kind of person who is like extremely hard to get a hold of because of this?
On the phone, a little bit on the phone. But I try to be good, and I'm actually pretty good at responding, generally speaking, I would say.
That's so awesome, man. I feel even more privileged now that you'd like show up on my podcast. I didn't know that you're so hard to get a hold of.
No, I'm not hard to get a hold of. I'm just like, because I look at my phone quite a lot, and I just don't want somebody else to decide when I should be looking, I guess. I look at it a lot, so I just don't want somebody else to decide for me.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to tell you that the algorithms decide how often you pick it up and scroll? But no, I really appreciate that. I know a lot of people, actually. I know this one person who's a performing artist who, same thing. Like, they wake up in the morning, and most of us, I'm guilty of this, the first thing I'll do is I'll look at my phone. Mainly because my phone is my alarm and I have to turn it off. But a lot, like this person is like, I wake up and I distance myself from all media as much as possible. And my neighbor, he's an actor in a TV series, he like wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he just, his main thing is I need to get out of the house. So he goes out of his house and walks like 30 minutes to a coffee shop, has coffee there, and then walks back. And he's like, okay, where's my phone? I'm ready now. I think that's important. There's a lot of emerging data on how this stuff is destroying us as a society. So I'm going to take that and try it out, and I'll send you an update about how it goes. You probably won't read it when I send it, which is kind of cool.
I'll read it on my own time.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's talk about, and let's wrap up the Liveblocks discussion here, and then I want to talk to you about some founder stuff. But the Liveblocks discussion I want to have is around new stuff. I'm so happy that y'all announced a changelog, which is weekly now, which means this team ships. I guess the changelog for next week is just going to be the announcements from Unveil, right?
Right. So yeah, we decided to introduce a changelog because, to be honest, I think that's a mistake we've made. I felt like we were underselling the work we were doing. Like, we're shipping a ton every week, really good stuff. The team is doing incredible work. But because we're a small team, we just didn't have, I felt like, the capacity to continue writing about all the things that we shipped. And so instead we tried to do something a bit different here and just follow like what some companies do and have a changelog where engineers and people shipping stuff to production are responsible to add the bullet points to that changelog. And so if there are any founders or anybody out there, I definitely recommend doing that, because it creates this, I think the role of a changelog is more to show like momentum, more than anything else. Show people that you ship a lot. And so, that's why we did it.
Is that manual or is this automated in some way? And I ask because I know some teams will use like GitHub releases and just pull the
Yeah,
releases
so
from
we
the week.
used Chris from our team did an incredible job here. We basically have two repos. We have our open source repo, Liveblocks, and we have a private repo where our website and the dashboard is, and that's a Next.js app. We have a changelog.md file in the open source repo, and like every time that gets merged to main, it automatically out of that MD file creates the changelog pages, and then you can get a URL and kind of paste it. We also, because we wanted this to be as little work as possible, as little effort for engineering, for it to be consistent and continue to be out every week, we also generate kind of the thumbnail top based on the week number, and like it has a color every week, a different color based on the number and that kind of things. Those
Okay,
kind of
but
things.
the bulleted list of what changed is actually like an engineer updates this markdown file.
Yeah, everybody updates, and we publish it every Friday. We merge it to main every Friday. We merge it to main, and everybody when somebody merges something in production, we kindly ask them like, please make sure to add like a bullet point so people know what you've shipped.
Right. Awesome. I also see that you all shipped events recently. So events around whenever a user does anything interactive, so to speak, including connect and disconnect and types and so on. Including information about, I was surprised by how much detail there is because it's where they even connect from. I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's a new. We're just trying to make like when you build like, this is feedback we got from a lot of our users is like when you build a collaborative app, there's a lot that happens from people, so it can be very difficult to understand like where the users come from, what happened, and so we just wanted to give more visibility to developers, and so we created this page so that people understand like who joins the room, from where, what they did, so give them a bit more tooling to build better apps essentially.
It'd be nice to have user management there where I can ban people who are being like abusive or something from this.
Yeah.
Awesome. I wanted to ask, so in a number of discussions with founders and CEOs in the series, and I'm talking about people like Glauber from Terzo and Brandon Bayer from Flight Control, it's all tech people, right? I've asked them what the biggest problem with building a company like theirs is. And you know what's really interesting? The answer I get often is it's not about the tech. The tech problems are hard, they are challenging, they're respectable to solve. But almost unanimously, they say, yeah, but the tech is the easy part because we know what we're doing. The design is the easy part because we have skilled people. The founders and CEOs that I've talked to and that people have listened to will often say that the hardest problem with growing a company that they're building is the positioning, messaging, and marketing. And this is like infinitely harder than any technical challenge they have to solve. Has that been your experience?
I feel like it would be very easy for me to say like the tech is not the hard part because I'm not really responsible for the tech. My co-founder and the rest of the engineering team are kind of handling that stuff, thankfully, so I can focus on like the design and the marketing and the positioning that you just mentioned and the sales side of things.
Oh, this is your bigger focus then?
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest, things evolve over time, obviously, as we scale the company, but now I spend like the majority of my time on the marketing side of things and sales. I went to the dark side, I guess. But to me, that was really, it's difficult because like I come from a design engineering background and I had to learn that stuff. Like I'd never done like enterprise sales or like marketing even. Like I really like marketing because I like the design side of things of marketing, like doing like marketing launches and that kind of stuff. But that's very difficult. Like the positioning point that you made really resonate with me. And the big reason we're doing this Unveil is also like for positioning reasons. We want to make sure our messaging resonates with the people we're trying to sell the solution to. And we've had so many different iterations throughout the company. At first, we position ourselves in a certain way, then we try to position ourselves more as an infrastructure. and now we're like changing a little bit again that positioning. And every founder I talk to, every VC I talk to, like this is a common topic that keeps coming up, because you can have an amazing product.
Yeah.
If you haven't nailed your ideal customer profile and the messaging you want to have for those people, yeah, you're not gonna have a serious business that grows, right? So definitely difficult.
How does
Still
one
iterating.
measure? How does one measure progress towards or against finding your ICP and also finding product market fit and refining your messaging?
So product market fit is an entire topic. It's the one thing about product market fit is there's no real way to measure it, and every founder that has found product market fit will say, "Oh, you will know when you have it." Like it's like one of the things you know when you have it, but there's no real way to measure it. The founder of Superhuman, I forgot his name, created a framework to define product market fit. And I believe the question that you need to ask people is like, I forgot exactly the wording, but it's like, how would you feel if this product stopped existing tomorrow?
Mm.
And then you have a ranking based on that. And like there's a certain percentage on this that gives you a better answer on like how important that product is to people. That's one way to do it. But I would say for me and for us at Liveblocks, it's just like every launch where like every month we see like the progress in terms of like how many more customers we have, how is the retention going, how is the revenue growing, how is the engagement overall, and like this is something you definitely feel. And at different phases of the company, we felt like definitely stronger and stronger product market fit. But yeah, it's one of the things. It's just one of the things that's really hard to measure, and there's a lot of podcasts about this topic that I would love to get into if you want.
Yeah, I do want. And specifically, I'm just interested in, because I think y'all have done I'd say maybe better than average job of this. And I say that because I'm literally on my way to another conference right now. And every time I talk about real-time multiplayer, there's two names that come up. There's PartyKit and Liveblocks. And I think even in differentiating yourselves, it's at least among people building multiplayer applications, it's known what you offer. And I think that's very powerful. So I guess the question here is how do we establish that? Is it just speaking at conferences? I mean, I'm a conference speaker. Is it just taking yourself to events? Is it running events like Unveil? Is it I guess it's also the website, it's social media. There's so many facets to the stone, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wouldn't say it's conferences because we haven't done too many conferences so far.
Yeah, and every time you have done, I think it's just been you that I've met there.
Yep. Yeah. I've only been the one kind of doing some of the talks, but I haven't done too many. Maybe I've done like 3 or 4 perhaps conferences since we started the company. I just find it really difficult to run the business and also do this. So that's what we've done so far. But I think for me, like I feel like the showing momentum is very important. So showing like launches, showing that you're doing stuff, also giving value to people. Like I think like some of the best articles we put out, and when I say best, it's like the articles that I got the most visits and the most signups were actually in-depth technical blog posts explaining how to do something very specific. And Chris write an amazing blog post about like how to do like live cursors, how to animate live cursors, and he goes super deep into those articles, into those details. I think Josh Cuomo, like I think we both met him at React Paris, does this amazingly well. Like those interactive, in-depth blog posts. That's one way we built that brand equity at Liveblocks early on. I think showing momentum is important, and I think like showing like quality, I think is very important to us.
Yes.
Polish and showing the care and love we put into things.
Yeah.
I am so convinced that this shows up. People feel it. And
Yeah.
it might sound silly, and like a lot of people were like, why would you spend time doing this little micro interaction on the website or whatever? But I'm convinced that when people see this, they're like, oh, these people that put this together, like, they really care. And if they care about this, chances are they're gonna care about this part of the product and all those things. And I think building trust is very important
Yeah.
for any business. It is especially important when you're building a dev tools and a product for developers. Because developers, the challenge that you have when you build a company or a product for developers is that it's probably one of the only market where like whatever you build, the audience you're building it for, their option is to also decide to do that themselves. You know what I mean? Like it's quite challenging. Like if you build a product for accountants, it's not like I'm gonna go and build this myself. You know, this is not the case. But like for developers, it's quite a bit harder to convince them. And so I think showing care, love, and dedication to the craft is definitely something that I think made us stand out in some way. Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think this is what Apple, for example, does extremely well. Tim Cook shared about Apple TV Plus in WWDC, where they are the top of all the streaming platforms in terms of originals for 3 years in a row. And that's because if you watch something like an Apple TV Plus original versus like The Circle on Netflix, you'll notice it's different. I think we see that, we intuit that, even if we don't want to acknowledge it. You can tell when a lot of care has gone into something.
For sure.
And I think there may be, I'm not a sociologist. I'd love to get one on the show to talk about the evolutionary angle of this, where really all we're trying to do in life is predict where is safety, where is no safety. And if you look at a product that a lot of care has gone into, you go like, okay, these people are probably going to take care of my company if I choose to outsource my multiplayer, because they care about their own. I think that's such an interesting angle. And I want to really emphasize and extract that for founders, CEOs, even just technical people listening, and not everybody listening, that when you put care into something, it gives people confidence. I think that's so cool. And thank you for that. Okay. We talked about it. Living in a Paris apartment.
Can you hear it?
I can hear it. Yes.
Oh,
it's
I didn't think you would hear it, but yeah, they're currently rebuilding the apartment upstairs.
That's I heard them also vacuuming earlier. This is so cool. That's okay. So let's maybe, because I don't know how long they're going to keep drilling, let's start to wrap up. I want to talk to you about the CEO charter we talked about in Paris. I've been doing this with all the guests, sort of like HTML is a living standard. If there was a living standard, a document for things technical founders should know, things non-professional CEOs should know. And by professional CEO, I mean someone that a board like gets from somewhere to be a CEO. You know, they've done this for like 20 years. If there was such a document to exist, what would you add to this document based on things that you've learned and experienced? I think you and I talked in Paris about being adaptable. So Matt Bielman from Netlify, he said this first on the podcast, and you agreed. I'm curious if you have insights from your experience as a technical founder CEO that you would add to such a document to prepare future ones on what to expect and maybe what to not miss.
That's a really good question. I didn't think about it too much. I just don't want to give like standard cliche answers.
Yeah. Get enough sleep, do some exercise. Good luck.
Thanks. Probably won't have time for this. But I think for me, like, oh, they're going to be drilling now. Sorry. Go ahead.
This is so funny. It's like you get interrupted by a drill. And this is very behind the scenes for listeners, but on macOS, you may have the possibility to turn on voice isolation mode.
Is it in the...
There should be a green icon near the clock with a camera symbol. And if you click on that, there's mic mode. And if you switch mic mode to voice isolation, this may help.
Sound settings.
It says mic mode. It's in your tray. This is so cool. I'm not even going to edit this out. Let's be authentic.
Anyways, we'll try to make it work. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Maybe if you step closer to the mic.
I can hear you now. 1 sec. I just screwed this up. We're gonna make this work. I promise. Sound settings.
It's definitely not in sound settings.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, great.
Anyhow, so yeah, advice for founders. I think like being, like as as a CEO, and to be honest, like I'm still learning. I'm gonna be learning for a while for sure. We're 13 people now. Started just the two of us, and I think the biggest thing is that you have to not get attached to oh gosh, you have to not get attached
okay.
to like something that you take a lot of pride in or something that you do, and that's kind of your task. Over time, I think your goal is to remove yourself from the equation. And so that can be very challenging. And for me, one challenge is like, I love the design aspect. I love crafting things, putting UIs together. This is something I try to give away, super early on.
Yeah.
And you have to constantly learn and like do new things. And so for me, like last year, my main focus has been learning how to do enterprise sales. And I had never done it. And so like being flexible, like being willing to learn, and handing things over to other people and trusting your team to do the job is key. Pretty cliche answer, I feel like, but I think that's probably the number one thing.
Well, you say it, and I think a lot of us hear that and go like, yeah, and that sure, we'll just do that, but that's not easy at all, right? Like you care, especially as somebody who has built the design from the ground up when the company was younger, you care, and when you care, how can you not interfere? How can you not micromanage? So it may be cliche, but it's definitely not easy. And I want to push on that a little bit and ask you: have you been tempted to go like, wait? What is this person doing? Can I give my input? Should I give my input? Yeah. Could you speak a little bit to that?
That is quite challenging, and if people on the team listen to this, they probably have an opinion. So it's hard to say like how I am as a manager. I also think that it depends on the person. I think every person, it's not like you have one style of management. Every person is managed differently, depending on their needs, depending on how they like to be managed. And so I might be micromanaging a little bit more with some people than others, but I try to give people as much space as they need. And not try to get involved too much in the details. But it depends. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to get into the details sometimes. You just have to pick and choose what's important. And right now for the launch, for instance, I'm like super involved, from like the overall like marketing strategy and the communication plan, all the way to like, why is this rounded corner 6 pixels and not 8 pixels? But that's because I care a lot, and I don't think this is necessarily micromanagement. I think it's like making sure we have a cohesive experience end to end. And if anything, I think making sure the team knows I care on my side of the equation, but also on the engineering side, like making sure that everybody on the engineering side knows that Guillaume, my co-founder, is going to care about specific engineering details. It really matters because this creates this culture of like everything I knew needs to be at the specific quality level. It doesn't mean that Guillaume or myself are always going to look into it, but people need to know that we might at some point, and there might be a case where we look into it. And I think it creates this culture of like everybody's pushing each other for quality, and it doesn't have to be. I don't think micromanagement has to get into play here necessarily.
Yeah. I think it's a tough one to walk. So I've not been a CEO or a co-founder, but I have been a manager in multiple scenarios, and it's always been tricky to have a meeting with people and go, listen, I expect your best. I expect you to really like care as much as I do, because we're trying to, for lack of a maybe sounding too poetic, we're trying to move mountains here, and we're trying to do something that we want people to look at and go, wow, right? And sometimes I don't know why the best just doesn't happen. I notice people start to drop balls, and people start, like you said, there's everything's 8 pixels rounded, but this one thing is 6 pixels and it looks weird. Navigating those situations has been challenging for me. It's as it sounds like it has been for you. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to like find a way to get people to bring their
Motivated?
best. Yeah, exactly. To bring their best as often as possible. And when they don't, that's totally understandable. I mean, we're human beings. We can't be at level
Yeah.
10 every day.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, the secret sauce to get that, to like almost inspire people to bring their best. Do you have any tips there?
I don't know if I have the secret sauce. I definitely don't, actually, because sometimes I'm frustrated, but very often I'm actually pleasantly surprised. Most of the
Nice.
time I'm actually pleasantly surprised, and I think this comes from. I don't know where it comes from, but I think if you create a culture where like whatever I'm asking you to do, or whatever feedback I'm giving you,
Yeah.
it's not about you, it's about the work. And whatever I tell you, I would not tell you something that I wouldn't do myself.
Mm.
And another thing, for instance, like I personally, I make mistakes all the time. Like,
Yeah.
of course. And I try to never shy away to like raise
Own
my
them.
hands like, oh, yeah, my bad. I made that decision. I own that decision. That was a mistake. Let's move
Yeah.
on. And I think doing this creates a safe space, I think, because I don't know, I have to as a team, but I feel like if I give like maybe a feedback to improve something or do something maybe slightly different, I thought about doing this way. Hopefully, I hope that the team sees this as like, okay, maybe that's tough to hear, maybe I wouldn't do it that way, but like I know that if Steven tells me this, like he probably would do the same to himself. It would give that same feedback to himself if he was in the other situation. In the other side, sorry. So I think like being vulnerable in that sense I think it's quite important to build that trust and that culture. And a culture like this is key to creating high quality work, I think. So that's probably one thing that I would definitely recommend people.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Stephen, I know it's been a long discussion. It's been a long time coming, and I do want to stop here and just thank you for your contribution to the podcast and also to the tech community, and also to every user on the web who has a pleasant multiplayer experience thanks to Liveblocks. I don't take it lightly that you've been here sharing all of this insight on how to do remote work well and take care of oneself by turning notifications off, talking about Liveblocks, how it's built, the motivation behind it, the Unveil event, all of it. On behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you so much, Tejas. That was a really fun conversation, and sorry about the drilling upstairs. I hope that wasn't too distracting. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and hope some people will like it as well. So thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Stephen Fabre. I hope you got out of it as much as I did. I hope you enjoyed learning about the complexity behind enabling developers to build collaborative multiplayer applications. I hope you could really resonate with his journey going from I'm watching a product to I'm building a product. And finally, I hope you also see the value in design engineering, perhaps investing in growing that skill set for yourself or employing someone with it. I think design engineering is underrated personally, and I can't wait to see it rise in the industry. And hopefully this podcast can play a role there. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, the best way to support it, honestly, is to subscribe to the channel and like it on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple and or Spotify, if you can leave up to a 5-star review, and of course, sharing any modality on social media will really help get the podcast out there, and also just be a signal to me that it's worth continuing. Thank you for joining the discussion. Thank you to our sponsors, and most importantly, thank you for your interest in web engineering.